part that burns implies that there are some parts that don't burn or that maybe burn differently.
The part that burns is the part that glows. Not only is there more to us than the hurt parts, but also sometimes the hurt parts are the powerful parts.
Our guest today is Jeannine Ouellette, whose memoir, The Part That Burns, chronicles a childhood of trauma, resilience, and survival.
This is a book about early trauma. It's a book about the undertow of that early trauma and the way that it manifests in adult life in all sorts of predictable and unpredictable ways. But I think ultimately it's about reaching a crossroads and having to make a decision about living a half-life or entering headlong into those silent places, those shadowy places that are actually very loud. It's ultimately a book that's really about resilience and becoming a fuller version of oneself.
You have some literary heavy hitters providing praise for this book, and people are responding to this book. Why do you think that is?
I was really afraid to write this book, and so to have that reception has been so phenomenal. It's been, I couldn't be happier or more grateful. I really wanted to take this traumatic thing that shaped my life. I really wanted to make something, even though that's a hard topic, I really wanted to make something beautiful out of it. And I dearly hope that to some degree that, that effort to make something beautiful out of something hard is what people are responding to. That's my hope.
One quote I love from the writer, she's journalist Amy Goodman. She says to go to where the silence is. Now, like you, we don't always like to go where the silence is because there's a reason it's silent, for ourselves and for other people. This is the book that you didn't want to write and you put off writing, but you wrote it. What did you do to get through the writing of this?
First of all, it took me a really long time, Sonia. So I didn't really start building this book in earnest until I was in my mid-40s. The actual active writing of it was about 5 years. I used some experimental techniques and devices in the writing, and that was, for me, made all of the difference. It was not a narrative that I could approach in a linear way. I really needed to find alternative ways to engage with the material, which made it less traumatic for me. It made it, at times, really fun, which I know seems really nutty, but I have a very vivid memory when writing the chapter Tumbleweeds in the book. I happened upon this image of the jackalope. I had given myself a bunch of constraints, like things I had to include, like the inauguration address, Jimmy Carter's inauguration speech, and and the mating and breeding of the Western meadowlark, and so all of these like oddities that I kind of had to braid in. One of them was the jackalope, like the mythology of the jackalope, and when I stumbled on that and saw the way that it pushed metaphorically against the narrative of my stepfather, I was like so lit up by that. I thought it was really cool. I thought it was really working. And I remember telling my husband, trying to explain it to him and being, really like this about it and being like, I don't know, it's really weird, honey. Like, I don't feel like this isn't a fun topic to write about.
But you shouldn't be enjoying it so much.
I shouldn't be enjoying it so much.
The Fragmented Essay has been like an interest of mine for many years because I know memory works that way. But now I'm starting to think that also people who have experienced trauma, poverty, whatever it is as children, I think we tend to also, at least I'll speak for myself, I tend to get a little overwhelmed by the narrative. And so it's not only that I remember it that way, it's that I can handle telling it that way.
To craft narrative requires such an intense and devoted attention, and there is a reliving. To create and capture sensory experience on the page requires this openness in the body and in the mind as we re-enter those places that, like, I loved what you said, the silent places.
What you're saying is so important too, like the idea of dynamically engaging with the material versus simply recording it, right? Because that's not what this writing is doing. It's engaging. And I love that because readers get to grow from that and be challenged. But when we're writing, we get to do that same thing. I wondered if you would just read a short excerpt for us.
I'm going to read this last section of the chapter I talked about, which is tumbleweeds divided into 5 parts. And the last one is subtitled Mother or Mater in Latin. In fairy tales, many children are motherless, but that's not always how it was. Snow White was originally tormented by her own mother, not a stepmother. Hansel and Gretel were abandoned in the forest by their 2 natural parents. And only one version of Sleeping Beauty has the prince's own mother trying to eat her grandchildren and her daughter-in-law. It was the Grimm brothers who changed these bad mothers into wicked stepmothers. When I grow up, I will be a mother. This is a doorway. I'll have 2 babies, a girl and a boy, or maybe 3, lined up from biggest to smallest. I will take them into the forest and toast cheese on sticks over an open fire, just like in Heidi. I will give them salty milk from country goats that eat straight out of our hands. And in late autumn, we will decorate an evergreen with dried oranges and pine cones dipped in peanut butter and make a circle around the tree and sing to the animals to bless the long winter ahead. I will bake homemade bread from wheat I grind myself, cutting thick slices while it's still steaming hot. And I will slather the bread with creamy butter and raw honey all the way to the crust. Then, one day, in the deepest part of winter, my firstborn daughter will pull her baby brother's hair and push him headlong into the edge of the banister. And before I know what I am doing, I will slap my daughter across her velvet cheek. For a long time, I will believe this is a curse. In fairy tales, the most vulnerable women are the old ones. These crones are past the usefulness of childbearing and housework. Often, they are the family storytellers. They interpret folklore in light of their own history and best interests. Then, they try to sweeten up their young listeners and remind them that however ugly and foolish and useless a crone may appear, she could also be a fairy in disguise. She could be magic. My mother is old now. Tell me about Wyoming, I think of saying. Tell me about Mafia, your purple satin sheets, how long you knew. Tell me about when you were young, before me, before your parents died when you were still a child. Tell me again about your great aunt Tot, how you pretended to fall into the outhouse over and over, and how she always came running, no matter how many times you played the same trick. Tell me about the chickens that lived upstairs and the time your uncles got drunk and sawed a house in half, and how you went off to play in the dangerous part of the woods and punctured your leg with a railroad spike. Tell me once more how you loved watching the blood spurt up in a perfect pulsing arc. Here's the thing about doorways. Once you step through them, you cannot go back. Even if you do, you will never see the world the same as before. Cottonwood leaves will forever shimmy, singularly in the wind. It might be hard. Someday I will return to the Wyoming of my childhood. I will roam the open fields all the way to the foothills. Forget mountains, they're too far out. In the fields, I will smell the peppery dirt. I will rub sage into my palms, my hair, my mouth. I will rip a tumbleweed from the ground and feed it to the wind. I will visit the town of Douglas on June 31st between midnight and 2 a.m. I will walk in the moonlight and cast a watchful eye. I will trace my fingers along the length of barbed wire that separates one plot from another. I will feel in the dark for that particular point, sharp and exact, where I turned.
Thank you. So beautiful. I was thinking when you were reading that, 2 things. One, just how carefully and sort of gorgeously you notice. You talked earlier about paying attention, and your writing is just filled with paying attention. But I was also thinking, like in the beginning, when you're reading about your own children, how we tend to think when you haven't had, a textbook mother that, it's not easy. We tend to look at the things that we didn't have. But I love the way that you notice and cherished motherhood differently because of what was not there.
Yeah.
So I'm not trying to put a positive spin on it. It's just that I think when you don't have something, it becomes even more radiant to you when you get bits of it. And so you feel that in that reading.
That gave me a little goosebumps when you said that. That's such a beautiful and accurate description of what all that meant to me. And even to this day, with my kids are grown now. And in fact, the youngest, who will be 26 next month, is coming over later today to get my help with something. And that feeling of radiance around that, like, I think there's a way in which one of the things you're pointing at is you take nothing for granted.
Can you share a favorite writing prompt, or one that you think might be helpful for people just starting out or maybe stuck in a memoir?
One of the prompts that really helped me get going on this book, I was in a memoir class at the U of M, University of Minnesota, where I work. And the first thing that the professor asked us to do was write a story about our childhood, which I didn't at that time. I was like, no, I don't do that. I don't write about my childhood. And so I gave myself a prompt, a really simple prompt. It's called Replace the Word. Take a favorite piece of writing. So take a passage of writing that you love. In the Naming the World craft book, they actually ask you to type it out like 2 or 3 times first. Just type it out word for word, like get the rhythm of that piece of writing. And then you're going to replace the words with your own words. And I always encourage people to try to do that part of speech for part of speech, so that an article is an article, a noun is a noun, a verb is a verb, while you're busy thinking about adjective, So that part of us that, tends to be in a hurry to say something, it's usually that part of us that's saying something we've already said. So if we can kind of quiet that voice down, and this very effectively does that. Like anything can fail. If you're going to work with a writing prompt, then you're opening yourself up to I might get nothing from this. Right. But time and again, in every group, there are people who look at what they wrote, and it's as if someone else wrote it, and they say, where did that come from?
That's so good. I tend to resist that kind of prompt because I like to think I'm in control. But recently, a friend, she's doing an anthology of essays about angels, and she invited me, and I thought, well, I don't really have anything about angels. But instead of saying no, I said yes, because in the meantime, I'm trying to finish up an essay about my grandmother, who was not an angel at all. But having to combine those two things frees me up in a way that you're talking about. So I'm not in charge anymore. If I were writing about my grandmother, I'd do the typical path, which isn't that exciting. I love that so much. I'm going to try it. Thank you for that one.
I decided to bring this one. Can you see
it? Oh, it's so colorful.
It's really colorful, and you see the chickens. Anytime that you can juxtapose incongruous things, interesting things happen. So this mug is sort of like my reminder of that.
I want that mug. If I was in Minnesota, I'd try to get that mug from you. It's so cool. What has surprised you about publishing this book and putting your story out there?
It's really funny, Sonia, because this is my first literary book. I've written some educational books under contract and such, but this is like my first book.
Right.
And most surprising aspect is just simply that when people, it still feels new. It's like, oh wait, what, you read my book?
Yes.
I got a card from our neighbor. One of my colleagues reached out to me and said, I read your book and I just really want to talk to you for a minute about it. That still feels very fresh and new. Like, you did? Wait, you read my book?
Yeah. Right. The story matters to people. They're connecting with it. And not only that, it sounds as if they're connecting to you via the story, which is what art does, right? If you like what you heard, check out the links below to read more of Jeannine's writing and to order her book. Wait a second. Before you navigate away, hit subscribe and tick that little bell so that you're notified when new author interviews and craft material is posted. I appreciate your support as I continue to grow this channel.